Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Prose and Cons, a Precipice Fiction podcast. Joining us today, I am hosting. My name is Burnham, and with us we have Paddy Boylan, Alex Eldridge,
Hello.
Phoenix Raig,
hello,
and Matan Elul.
Hey.
So today's topic, we will be drilling down on the question, where do characters come from? We've talked about characters quite a lot. I have a memory of at least 2 other episodes where the topic has been character-centric, but we're coming at it from a slightly different angle this week. We'll be talking mostly about our own practice and how we come up with our characters and where we believe they come from. And I think this is quite fun because maybe we might be articulating things we haven't actually talked to about each other before. So this could be fun. Before we dive into the topic, though, let's do our round-the-table introduction of what everyone's been reading, watching, and absorbing this week. I'll throw you under the bus, Alex.
Yeah, sure. I've been doing a lot of reading, actually. I finished an audiobook version of Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, which is sort of like a female-centric American Psycho, and that was very confronting in the best way possible. So I really recommend that if you like any sort of Bret Easton Ellis stuff. And recently I've been reading one called Wolf in White Van by John Darnielle, who's the lead singer of the Mountain Goats. And that's sort of about this guy who's been horribly disfigured by an accident, and he essentially runs this tabletop game, like a mail-out tabletop game, and inadvertently encourages these kids to like kill themselves accidentally, and it's just very complex. And yeah, it's great. It's really, really good. I really recommend it.
Well, that sounds fantastic. What about you, Matan?
I must say before that, Alex, that escalated so quickly. I just did not see the ending of that sentence.
It really, really just keeps going, doesn't it?
It just got better. I don't know if I said that on a previous episode, but I got sucked into another round of Tolkien. I'm finding myself reading The Hobbit for I don't know how many times. It just started from YouTube suggesting a Lord of the Rings theory video to me, and I'm like, you know what I should do? Read like The Hobbit, all 3 books, and the Silmarillion.
You people and your rereading. It's
yes.
unimaginable to me.
I love it. I love just, I don't know. It's great. Highly recommended.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for my comfort food anime binges. I have about 2 that are a go-to. I have a series that I would have watched 12 times, and I will still go to it when I'm at my lowest, and it'll fix me over a weekend. It is the perfect drug. And I feel like I will defend the media to the end of the earth. It's having enough depth that every time I watch it, I'm still finding new things that I love.
Do we get to know what the series is?
Yeah, what is it, please?
You can't do that and then not say what it is.
Is it a Fruits Basket?
It's not Fruits Basket, but that is one that I do guilty watch, even though I was behind the wrong ship on Fruits Baskets. So when it pivots to the wrong bad choice ship, I just suddenly have a bad time. But the first half is great when it's still teasing which way will it go. The one I'm specifically talking about is Yuri on Ice, that I love and adore. It is perfect in every way.
Lots of fun. That's
yeah. The context twist in episode 10 that changes the whole thing.
Wait. I haven't watched that.
I haven't watched it either.
It's not a spoiler.
I have watched.
You all nodded as if you knew it. You're like, oh, you're
no, but I just think I heard you talk about it.
I probably have. I don't think I get through a day without talking about Eurydice, despite my best efforts. Anyway, what have you been up to, Phoenix?
Reading a lot more of Lord of the Rings. Like, been going hard kind of on that. That's my book of choice when I'm picking up a book. So getting through, we just got through the Battle of Gondor. Like, we're thick in the conflict of the 3rd book. or the Battle of Minas Tirith. Then on top of that, still watching thick in the Gilmore Girls, like really deep in, and I've really been appreciating Gilmore Girls, like, and I might bring up some Gilmore Girls as we talk about characters today. But and then another recent thing was I just watched the 3rd season of Love, Death, and Robots,
Nice.
which I liked, especially the last one of the latest season. That was the one that I really liked. The narrative really pulled me in on that one.
Brilliant. And what have you been reading, Paddy? If I could guess what book you're still reading.
Oh no.
I don't even need to say it at this point. When I'm not listening or reading Moby Dick, I'll say, but otherwise just assume it's that. But also, I've started this book right here, and you can see it through the glare, called
Sapiens by
yeah,
he's an
okay, you've heard
Israeli.
of this guy? He is an
Yeah.
Israeli. I was going to ask you how to pronounce the name. I was going to say Yuval Noah Harari.
That was
Close
impressive,
enough?
Paddy. That was very
Okay, well,
impressive.
Thank you.
Yuval
thank you.
Noah
I'm a
Harari.
linguist.
No, that was
Okay.
great.
I was never going to guess that. It's very interesting. It's like an anthropological history of humanity, kind of right from the beginning. And like in this density, he touches on pretty much everything about human evolution, the human condition. I've heard it was criticized a little bit academically after the fact. There's some people that don't agree with all these conclusions and these evidence, but it's very interesting. Very good, not popular science. What would you call it, Matan? Just
Unpopular science?
unpopular science. There we go. It's good unpopular science.
Well, segueing straight into our topic, because I think we probably have a lot to talk about. I had a crack this morning just when I was thinking about how we could talk about character and start dissecting it and how we create character. Just for myself, I tried to jot down kind of the pillars that go into making characters distinct from one another. So I guess almost for as long as I've been writing, obviously, I think we all aim to, every time we create a character, we want them to feel distinct. This is a unique new character every time, because it's quite easy to point fingers and be like, at famous examples of authors that potentially their characters start to feel a bit sameish, or when they write a new property, you can kind of see, oh, that's got similar traits to, I recognize that from a previous novel they did. So I think it's always kind of a craft thing, a sign of good writing, if it is just a personal challenge to always go into it. Every character is unique. Every character is a new person. So feel free to jump in while I'm talking, because this isn't a tool that I teach. This isn't a tool that I'm borrowing from anyone. This was literally me just trying to, like, on paper, find the different pillars of what makes characters distinct. And easy for me was talking kind of visually. So you're talking about their visual traits, picturing them in their mind. They look different, visual traits. In a different pillar or a different circle of the Venn diagram, I put kind of setting and environmental factors and the things they would do in their environment as a separate thing. And I guess what I mean by that is it's quite easy for me to imagine one of my characters in this world, in this setting, and that's automatically going to shape things they do, and they're going to behave differently and seem different to this other character I have in a different world, in a different setting. So I have that pillar over there, kind of environmental things they do, visuals. And then I had what I articulate to myself, I guess, as their personality. That's just their traits, just their characteristics, just the way they speak, how they're going to interact with other characters. And then my fourth pillar I had was I lumped together backstory and morals, because that was almost hard for me to separate, that, say, things that have happened to them and in their past that have made them the way they are, and their morals, their guiding principles are almost one in the same. I guess that's the nature versus nurture question. And
Like
I'm not
values almost.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily here to unpick nature versus nurture, but I just lumped that together as backstory and morals. And I did also wanted to make a point that in my 4 pillars there, I didn't include wants and desires because for me that almost starts to feel like plot tools. And I guess I would throw it open to you guys, because when I start to think about the moment a character wants something, they feel like they're in motion for me. And now I'm thinking about a story happening. I'm thinking about plot. That's a separate craft to character for me. Anyway, have at that. Do you agree with those 4 pillars? Would you add to those pillars?
I would like, I don't know if I could categorize them in, I hadn't thought of categorizing those 4 levels there. Let me see. So that's, you're basically talking about, let me just make sure I got it right.
Yeah.
So physical appearance, context, or call just the world building.
Yep.
Characteristics, and then values, essentially.
Yeah,
And that seems like a pretty good triumvirate. Like I can definitely see someone like handing out a sheet on a writer's workshop that's got like a little circle and it's got those things. Yeah, no, for sure. I would say, coming at it from a slightly different aspect, and I think these things probably fit in to that, or parts of that anyway. I'd say for me, it's sort of like relatability in terms of you being able to see, oh, I can see what this person's feeling. It's almost like empathy sort of thing. It's like, I understand who this person is. Then I'd say there's like depth and complexity, which is obviously a longer term thing because you need to see kind of the journey they're going through. I'd say verisimilitude is a thing as well. So the ability to recognize something as real in a sense. You know, that might sort of dovetail with relatability, but basically just something that you can be like, oh yeah, this feels like something would be real. And then one that I almost forgot, but for me is really, really important, is dialogue. And just it's almost its own language and code system for explaining aspects of different characters. So look, I don't know if that meshes with your version of it at all, but because Ali sort of sent us a little thing beforehand saying like, hey, what would you guys think? Those were the things that came to mind for me.
I really like the 4 pillars and I really agree with them. But my process is kind of different, is that I do think I get to these pillars, but not necessarily in that order, in which I will start with the desire and the disadvantage. Like, what do they want and what's in the way? This guy wants to be rich. The disadvantage is that he's got a gambling addiction. This girl wants to have a family. The disadvantage is that she's self-destructive. And after I have those 2 in place, I kind of try to find the characteristics and the context to amplify this conflict between desire and disadvantage. In my characters, a lot of the time, the disadvantage is related to kind of shooting your own foot, like characters that kind of, they can't stay out of their own way. And that kind of leaks into characteristics, because characters that do that tends to become jaded, maybe because it's happened again and again, maybe sarcastic. So I start with those 2 and then I kind of fill up the rest. But I really liked how you put environment into it, because that's something maybe sometimes I don't think about enough, but like how the environment really shapes the character.
It sounds like you bake in conflict into the original conception of the character.
Yeah.
Like almost as a ground zero thing. That's very interesting. I want to try that sometime, actually.
Yeah, no, I love how you've mentioned that. And Alex also mentioned journey. So that was me. I agree with that. And I think a well-developed character needs all that. But I guess for me, when I'm thinking about the raw distillation of a character, those are both plot tools you've talked. Well, in my mind, that's how I separate them. I'm like, that's story stuff. If I was to talk about my character and describe them in a vacuum, I almost have to separate them from the plot.
Like the baseline level, it's like, this is where they start and this is where I'm coming from there, which, I see what you mean there. Like if it's like, hey, if we're just putting them in a vacuum and putting it down on the page and being like, hey, this is the thing, this is what they look like at the beginning, probably pre the beginning of the book. That's what it is.
Like there's no ring, there's no Sauron. What's Frodo like?
Yeah,
basically.
Completely agnostic of plot. Like I could take this character and technically drop them in any environment in any story because they're just the character and you've untangled them from the plot completely.
But that ignores Ali's environment.
The environment one. So in saying, it's almost that tricky thing between environment and plot. The reason I say environment is because I've done a few writing courses where something teachers love to do is they're like, take your character and just envision them like making like their morning routine. Just what do they do? Like how do they go to work? And I'm sitting here with my fucking like fantasy novel, and I'm like, what do you mean? You want me to write their people to work? You want me to write them going to school? And like that just explodes my brain. Like I can't take a character that has been developed for this world and just dump them in the real world. And I even struggle with my real world settings doing that. I wanted to ask if anyone else has tried those writing exercises and if they struggle or if they embrace them and love them.
Well, I like the idea of that, but I would approach it at a totally different angle. Like the morning routine thing, I see what that is. It's like, hey, if I put this I put this character into a place here and just make them run something, that makes sense. But for me, and this is why I specifically brought up dialogue, I always see what a character is made of more once they start talking to other people. And then I can kind of almost go back and fill in the blanks of internality, which are like backstory, like, this reminds me of this thing where I was doing that. But for me, I always start to see the first kernel of a character when they start talking to each other, even if it's just, I'm only observing one side of that, but usually it'll be both of them developing.
Do you ever realize a character trait like retroactively, like halfway through your book, you're like, oh yeah, he does that.
I only ever do that.
For sure.
No,
that's my entire process. I don't start out with character ideas. I don't start out with ideas of who I'm going to write. I'm really more interested in writing about ideas and concepts. I've got one big idea I want to explore, and then the characters are things that I drop in after the fact in order to be better. Like if the story demands this kind of character, I'll put them in. And then as I'll go, I'll detail them with, their traits and quirks and how they speak and stuff. But I never have a process of like starting with, I'm going to develop their appearance. I don't know what half my characters look like.
Yeah, so honestly. True. That's so true.
This sounds like such like a terrible thing to say. Like I'm just an absolute amateur. I guess I kind of am an amateur. I don't know what my characters look like unless it's necessary.
No, that's fascinating, because I wanted to ask you what pillar you feel like you start with, or if you change, because sometimes for me, it could be a visual. I don't know if that's because I do a lot of screenwriting, so I do start visually, but sometimes it could just start as simply as, I want to write a character with a fucking eye patch. And that's the ground floor, and build all the other pillars out from there.
You can work backwards from an eye patch. An eye patch is inherently like
exactly.
That demands
something
a story
happened.
written around it.
You got a story there.
Yeah, and they lost an eye. What does that do to them as a person?
Or they have both eyes.
Yeah.
Two eye patches.
Double eye patch.
No, it's just one eye patch, but their eyes there, and they just like it.
Yeah. Well, actually, sorry, Phoenix.
I was just gonna keep speculating about this eye patch.
On the eye patch. I was gonna say a lot of my process actually comes from where Paddy said as well. Like the thing I'm writing right now, it's like I saw a TikTok on something called like cast spelunking, which is basically like, okay, this is really super interesting to me. A bunch of people, like scientists, have found these huge sinkholes in China that haven't been discovered. They're totally, so we're talking about like immediately, like they go down them and they've got these like 50 feet tall trees, 100-foot tall trees, and like there's vegetation and stuff there that's immediately that's not been discovered before, or is a different genus or something. So for me, that immediately is like, oh, where can I do that? And then there was another thing of that came up that was like, hey, here's this quote, and I won't say specifically what that was, but basically it had to do with the uncanny valley, and I kind of put those things together, and then when I started writing, the characters kind of came out from that. So sometimes I'll write it like that as well.
So you start with an idea and characters just naturally populate it.
Yeah, totally. It's like a little program. You set the program and then it starts kind of running itself and things. Yeah, like what do they call those infinite movement machines where you like drop it and it like, you know what I'm talking about.
Newton's cradle?
Yeah, we all know it.
You know what I'm
The
talking about.
clacking balls.
Yeah, sort of. It's like a thing where you
The little drinking bird.
you set it moving and then it like you can't.
Some listener right now thought they understood, and then Phoenix dropped that one, and they're like, "What?"
Anyway. Is that not an infinite movement machine?
Yeah, let's go with the drinky bird. It's
I
that
don't
face.
know.
Yeah, but the characters populate the world or the idea that is the genus of that.
I would agree that I'm similar. I'm not often a character first writer, though I hear a lot of people, like a lot of other writers, swear to the death that they're character first writers. Phoenix or Matan, do either of you identify as character first writers?
I think I kind of give them priority, as in the world is more likely to change for them than I am to change them for the world. Like if I decide that this guy's a raging alcoholic with a daughter he has never met, that's probably going to stick around throughout. Yeah, it's probably going to stick around throughout the bajillion drafts. Whereas the world building, I feel, is a lot more, likely to be shaped around them.
I'm not character first at all. Very similar to Paddy. Like usually I have an idea or a concept that I think is really cool, or a story that I really like. And sometimes that idea can be coupled with an archetype of a character. I know I want someone that feels like this, and I know that's married to the idea. And so that's the closest I get. Otherwise, sometimes it's just a raw idea. And then while I start writing, a voice just kind of develops. And then that voice I start pulling that voice through more. And actually the one time I did have a character come through first. I was like, that's a quirky looking person, and I really like that aesthetic, and there's some cool things going on there. And I really struggled with it, because then like I had this character that was raw character. I only had the character, and I was like, where do I, like, what story do I drop this character in?
You could like shoehorn them into the story, right?
Yeah. And I did eventually find a story that I felt fit the character that I was interested in putting them in. But then I had a really hard time bringing their voice through. And that actually took a long time of just like kind of writing material with them in it. And it was like I was getting to know them, because because I was basing it off of an aesthetic. When I first started writing them, they really just read like a caricature, because their voice was linked to their aesthetic. So they weren't human. And so I really needed to kind of get inside of them, and just slowly, as I kept writing, they slowly became more and more human. And but that was a process.
Yeah, I kind of love that though, because I feel like the sentiment is that I completely agree with that. It takes a novel to get to know a character for me. And I know with my William Swallow manuscript, I had a pretty clear idea from character from the start, wrote the 100K words, went back to start editing. And I remember having this very visceral reaction going back and reading like scene 1. And I'm like, this isn't William. Yeah, the character had shaped and changed, and I had gotten to know him so well by the end of the draft that I went back and just saw this 2-dimensional straw man in my scene 1 that was actually quite alarming, that I then had to go in and fix and fill out with all the information I had collected through the entire process of writing the story. Has anyone else had a similar experience to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, a lot of my characters, like in this short story I'm writing, The Traitor, when I went in, the protagonist is a sociopath. He's someone that doesn't feel empathy, and that allows him just to do really, really nasty things. I didn't know anything about this guy other than he's a sociopath. I was reading a lot about sociopaths and psychopaths at the time, and I was really interested in it. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to write this guy. And as I went on, I discovered like, oh, he's like this. Oh, he's like this. Oh, he needs to be like this for this part of the story to make sense. And yeah, I did what you did, Ali. I backfilled a lot and basically wrote in more complexity. Not that it's the most complex character. It's not. But yeah, starts out as like an empty vessel, and by the end gets filled up with quirks and background and likes and dislikes.
I was going to say, Ali, you might have had the advantage initially in writing that, in that you had a story that was to some degree pre-existing. So you were able to sort of go in and write him as he was going, and you could probably put a lot of focus on that character. One thing I've noticed about this book as you've been going through it and we've been talking about it is that you have been really invested in this guy as a character. And I think maybe that might the pre-written nature of, not totally, I know you've sort of moved things around for dramatic effect and stuff, but the ability to have that already done like that might have freed you up to be able to put more juice into that character. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. It was almost freeing having the broad strokes of the plot already there, because it's based on a historical event, and then so all that's left for me to do creatively is work out, well, what kind of person goes from A to B to C, and for me to fill in that context. So it is almost just a pure character exercise at that point is what I'm doing, and really enjoyed it. Pivoting slightly, so since this group does appear to be very kind of plot context heavy, and then we let our characters organically grow. Has anyone had an experience with the wild card character, the character that shows up out of nowhere, fully formed and cannot be controlled?
Yes. And I've spoken so much, someone else can go, but yes.
Yeah, I was writing a little novella sort of thing. I actually don't even know what. I have this really bad habit of like writing. You guys will laugh, but like writing 20,000 words or something, being like, I've done good, I'm going to take a break, and never coming back to it. And one of the characters in that was this. It's sort of set in like I don't know, like it's kind of half fantasy, half science fiction. It's definitely a different world, right? And there's this sort of like woodland folk. And like the main like characters, that the main party were going through, and they had to go to this forest, and they needed like a guide. And the guy who came up was this guy called Chip, which I thought was funny because it was in a forest, like wood chip. Anyway,
yeah, we get it.
I didn't think of it at the time, but like I was like, oh yeah, yeah. But this kid, like, is just super sarcastic, super like, you know, just totally off the rails, and I'm kind of almost like, I might have to just give him his own thing now, you know. So funnily enough, like not long after that, I sort of like put it down. So maybe it was just he was too powerful, and I was like, I can't deal with this. That is aside.
Powerful.
That's beautiful, though.
It was very fun. That's probably the most egregious example of that happening, I think. But yeah, it happens all the time.
Phoenix and Matan, has that happened to you?
Well, sometimes I kind of want it to happen. Like I look at a character and like, can't you be a little bit more, you know, can't you decide what to do? Why do I have to tell you, do this, kill this guy, laugh like a crazy person?
What about Donnie? You were saying how like you were telling us how Donnie was a character that was just this background character, and then like he demanded to be front and center.
You know what? That's kind of true, because Donnie was supposed to just kind of open a door and then kind of fade into black, and then he just kept following the main character and having small talk, and then ended up surviving like this really awful situation. And now, look, he's not safe until the thing is published, but for now, he's got quite a big one.
I hope Donnie's okay, man. I love that character, and I love all these Stoat references. Where will they come from if there's no Donnie? There will be no Stoat references in the text.
Somewhere in his childhood, there was a Stoat that clearly left an impact.
This will all make a lot more sense to the audience once Absolution is released.
I really like when you said, I wish it would happen to me, because it makes it feel like it's like, I'm writing, I'm putting all these words on the paper. I'm really just hoping someday soon I meet someone. Like, is there someone out there for me?
Someday my prince will come.
So that's gonna find their way through my words and look back at me through the veil. Anyway, all this is to say, no, I don't think this has happened to me. But I have had, this is a very different thing where I have had characters' voices become stronger than I anticipated, but I only noticed it when I realized like the person I'm least interested in is my main character. And I'm like, oh, we got a problem. Like that means I don't know the voice of my main character, because I don't actually have an interest in what they're saying or feel who they are. So I needed to, I don't know, there's just a wake-up call in that sense. The secondary character was way more fun to listen to. I was like, dang it.
I feel like that's often the case. I can think of so many books I've read where the main character is not that interesting, and it's the other
Harry Potter
around them. Well, yeah,
what
sure.
What was
Harry
that?
Potter.
A very egregious sneeze.
Did you Was that a
What?
burp, Alex? Are you okay?
He's
Look,
not like
He's just
the most thrilling personality.
No,
he's
but
not bad at all. But
no,
I-
but
I-
pretty
that's
plain.
I don't want to go too much on a
He's-
tangent for this because Ali's like kind of planned out some stuff, but like the nature of the protagonist is such that there's sort of a cipher for the audience, and to be that,
Yeah.
I'm sure I've talked about this before, but to be that, you have to be sort of a nobody. Like it's like,
It's
oh,
true.
I'm a
he's the boy
You know,
who
I'm
lives,
like a
Alex.
male
What
age
more do you want?
45. Like
that's something that happened to him.
he
though,
like
you know?
his characteristics are he has a scar and he's brave.
He has glasses. Don't forget the glasses.
He's
And
older
his
in
glass.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's, and I don't think that's necessarily an issue with
No.
in writing. And I think it probably helps the fact that it helps the series be so popular because he is just such a cipher. Similarly, like Bella in Twilight. Is that what her name? Whatever. But
Master
Please
Chief
don't
and
put
Healy.
Harry Potter and Bella in the same sentence.
but I don't know. I think protagonists just generally tend to be a bit vanilla, and there's a reason for that. You know, I totally agree with
For
you.
that age group,
true.
'cause sometimes there is
Yeah.
a function where they are a self-insert, and I guess that's part of the promise of the genre and/or audience you're targeting.
But even older authors,
Yeah,
Stephen
true.
King does that a lot. You know, definitely.
It does like I'm just thinking of some other examples cropped up where I was like very interested in the main character. American Gods, the main character in that one was very like
boring.
he was
So
very
Shadow.
quiet, but like I loved the main character in that. And The World According to Garp by John Irving was very main character focused. So
Yeah.
no,
True.
That's not
No,
a
those
ha moment.
they're really good
I just-
examples.
yeah.
I
The,
love Shadow.
the only example I could think of from my own work where this has happened, I know, Matan, you've brought her up in a previous podcast, but everyone's favorite, Loretta, wasn't
love
a
her.
part of my initial outlining. So this was a character that came about from the void being like, all right, so Kiana, one of my main characters, needs a trainer, a mentor. So I had this empty slot. So I'm like, all right, time to create a character to just shove into the mentor space for Kiana. And then Loretta showed up on stage and proceeded to kind of take over the plot and start having massive effects on everything that was happening. And her personality has these domino effects on everyone else around her, to the point that every redraft I have to go back to this story, Loretta's getting more and more screen time, and she just can now no longer be removed from the infrastructure that is this story. And that was just very interesting that she was never planned as a part of the initial patchwork. She wasn't there, but now her DNA is too far embedded in what this story is.
But you know, that's what I like about that character is that, you know how these cheap old video games, you would only see the landscape when you're directly looking at it, and when you turn around it's gone, because to save computer power it only generates it when you're directly looking at it.
I think
The
that's
rest
still
of the
done.
time it doesn't exist. Probably
I think
still
that's
is.
still
that's
coming.
that's
that
still a
way,
thing.
not just cheap.
Yeah.
But my point is that Loretta feels like one of these characters, even when Kiana is not looking at her, she's still doing her things. And that's evident because the next time you see her, first of all, more people are dead. And the second is that things happened with her. And she feels like she's rooted in the story beyond just being part of the main character's worldview.
And that's such a
So I
wonderful
think- I think-
compliment, but I feel like a fraud accepting it because I feel like I've had very little agency over Loretta because she wasn't a part of the plan. She's my example of she stepped in and
The wild card.
inserted herself into the story. Another minor example, I may have mentioned it before, but very recently what I'm writing at the moment is Cypress 2. And a bit of a wild card character, but not as much as Loretta. There was a scene where he's left alone in an unlocked room, and there was no way for me to justify that he was going to get locked, like that door could get locked again. So the camera moves away, the story's gone elsewhere, but I'm like, oh, what's this character going to do with an unlocked door? Obviously, he's not going to stay still. I would have to contrive a way to trap him there. So it wasn't part of my plan, it wasn't part of the plot, but I had to follow the logical thread of, well, this is a character who's got a lot of agency and opinions and things he's going to do. So I had to follow. I'm like, what's he going to do with an unlocked door? He's going to walk out and he's going to make a mess. And he did. And I had to just that's now a part of my story. There was no way to avoid that. That was another example of a side character just taking control of my plot and doing their own thing.
It's like, I love it when your characters are established and your environment's established to the point where it becomes a procedurally generated book in some sense. Like, you've set the scene and it's like, well, I have to honor this. Like, that character's going to go that way. Crap. Like, I guess I got to write this. Like,
procedurally generated. I like that way of putting it.
Yeah. Reminds me of Diablo. Diablo 2 dungeon. Just like
Exactly.
I was just about to say, I feel like that's one of the biggest sins of writing, where character is ignored in favor of plot, where when we feel as an audience or as a reader that the character is behaving not in the way that has been established just for the sake of the plot, because we need to get the plot here. So, okay, he was this and that, now he's going to be something else. And we've all seen it in bad TV writing, bad book writing. Suddenly characters that were established as one thing, they behave completely different just because we need this manufactured conflict to happen or be resolved.
I love that it's a discussion. It's a give and take. It's so you need enough plot to write, to learn your characters. But once you do learn your characters, then you've got to give it over to them. Otherwise, you are going to run into the problem I think Matan just described, where suddenly these characters that are fully fleshed and would make their own decisions, and the audience would know they would make their decisions, suddenly feel like they're on hard rails that aren't their own.
Or you abruptly kill them.
Yeah.
I'm experiencing that with my redrafting of Dawnhouse, the first novel that I'm going to put out right now, which is that I've now gone through it and structured it in such a way that makes sense based on feedback. I haven't got all my feedback. I'm still waiting for Matan, who's going to send it to me very soon. Thank you. But yeah, so now I have to go back and fill in these gaps and in some senses rewrite scenes. And if the characters don't want to do that, they don't want to do the rewritten scenes, there's going to be an issue. So I'm very nervous about going back.
You got to put them under contract, Alex.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I can
No
just
loopholes.
kill them off, like Paddy said, if they don't do what they're told. So
Dawnhouse is horror, so you really can actually.
I actually can. That's true.
It's one of the few genres where we can get away with
Where
that.
you can just be like,
reckless
oh, they
event.
died.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
So pivoting slightly, with all the characters you've ever written, has anyone noticed any reoccurring things they do? Have you noticed that maybe sometimes you're accidentally repeating traits, personality traits, dialogue things people do? Or in Matan's case, are they grappling with similar problems again and again?
Yes, concerned stoics. I write concerned stoics as my default.
Is it because maybe you're a concerned stoic?
Yes. No, that's not even something I need to wonder about. Like, yes, absolutely. I put that into the story. Whenever I need a character that I don't know, they're kind of a linchpin character, things are hinging on them, they're going to be serious, they're going to be ultimately good intended, but they don't know how to communicate it. Just a few traits. And yes, I've noticed it. I've got like a default template that just sort of emerges, and I need to fight against that a little bit.
Is that for all characters or just your MCs?
No, just characters where if they're not serving a very specific purpose in the plot, sometimes even if they are, I'll come back to you on that. I actually don't know. I need to unpack this a little further with my psychiatrist.
I tend to keep bringing back the like worldly sage, the mentor character that kind of has the answers that the character is looking for. And I ran into a problem with the same character that actually came aesthetic first. I realized they were way too self-confident from the start. And I was like, you have nowhere to grow. You already have all the answers. I got to make you way more insecure, because otherwise this is not going to be an interesting story. But I tend to, lean into that. And I guess maybe it's my own like self-soother. It's like, these are the words that I want to say to myself, or like if someone I see having a hard time that needs to hear them, whatever. And so I keep bringing those into the book because I guess they're close to my heart, but it's like, I need to pull those away because it doesn't make for interesting storytelling if they already have all the answers, already have the self-development and stuff.
But there is that archetype of the wise, like Gandalf.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I don't know how much he developed as a character, but he's totally plays that role of the information giver, the dungeon master, the one that comes in and kind of guides people on their way. hand of the narrator.
Yeah.
Okay, this leads me to an interesting thing. But like, so I think that character is definitely a thing. I feel, okay, it's not going to be a blanket statement because obviously there's room for argument, but very rarely, or it'd be an exercise, you can't, you know what, I'm just going to say it like a blanket statement. You could just come at me. I feel like you can't have the wise sage character as your main character because otherwise it's too powerful and it removes the stakes. They need to be a peripheral character, and there needs to be the moments when they're not there. Like killing off Dumbledore. Spoilers. Killing off Dumbledore in the last. I'm so sorry. In the last book, Harry Potter needs to do it alone, and you need to remove that safety blanket and stuff.
Take off the training wheels.
And
take off the
and
training
let's be honest,
wheels.
Dumbledore is barely there anyway. Okay, even when the guy's alive, he's either down in London on business or fired. Okay,
and this is actually one of the problems I have with the newer Harry Potter verse movies, like Fantastic Beasts, is the stakes feel very low to me because I'm like, you're all fully established wizard adults. Like, yes, there are dangers in the world, but the stakes of the first movies were they're kids trying to figure it out. And when the adults create sanctuary, and you know, anytime the adults aren't there, oh, you don't know what's going to happen. And yeah, but here it's like, well, at least you're fully grown adults that have your head on your shoulders. Like, I feel fine.
There's no character growth with those sage characters, right?
No.
They are what they are.
They deliver the character growth.
Would you say that Gandalf, just as an example, Gandalf,
well, he changes color
going to Gandalf of White, but is that actually character development? To be honest, I actually haven't read through them, and I've seen the movies once. But is there any character growth in that, or is it just
Phoenix
/
Matan?
Blood device. Yeah, Phoenix.
Yeah. Oh, I would say there is character growth a little bit. I really love. There's no character growth. Well, it changes color. Yeah, it kind of is a weird character growth because it is like almost. You go, Matan. Actually, you go.
I just think like there is a little bit of character growth. Is that he becomes more hands-on. Like at first, it's like this counselor. He walks around. You want to listen? That's okay. You don't want to listen? That's on you. Whereas White Gandalf is like War Gandalf. He's a general, you know. He's not here to give you advice. He's here to tell you what you should do. And if you're not going to do it, he's going to find someone who will.
Yeah, right. Okay, fair enough. Because things get suddenly very serious, don't they?
Yeah, they describe him as being like, I think as Pippin or Merry was like, suddenly Gandalf felt like when he was severe, his severity was much, much more, but also his gaiety when he was happy was also amplified. So he became more like polarized.
Bipolar.
Yeah. But it is like Matan said, he became way more like, I'm not gonna like, things need to happen. And so I'm gonna like, no more bullshit. Like I'm gonna do these things. And he was like running and doing, he was pushing a lot of things into motion.
I know my personal habit, I think now that I've identified it, I'm doing it a lot less, but it was a learning curve to realize I was doing it. There was an era there in my writing where a lot of my main characters all had a similar problem in that they were all main characters who were at a crossroads in their life, who didn't quite know what they wanted. And thus the story revolved around them needing to reevaluate where they were in life and then choose to seek what they needed next, what they wanted to become. And, you know, that sounds all well and good, except that these are protagonists that really struggle to fucking do anything. And that becomes frustrating for a reader. They need to, if they don't have a clear want, they can't articulate to themselves. It's very hard to build a plot with momentum around that. But apparently I must have been grappling with something, because I had a series of main characters that were doing that at the time. And once I realized, I'm like, oh no, they're all doing the same thing. Then I slid sideways into William Swallow, who was a character with a very clear want, just to really try and exercise that problem I had found in my writing.
Maybe that's a good way to dovetail into your next question that you've put to us about whether we use real people or not. And since I've taken the floor here, I might as well jump in. I definitely find myself using real people. I think for Dawnhouse that I'm doing now, they're like there's three main characters essentially. Like two of them are guys, and they're basically composite parts of my personality, and then another one's my sister.
I was going to say that
Pretty much
They
it.
both feel like Alex, but like
Yeah.
different aspects of Alex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Like I said before, that I like the sense of verisimilitude, and I think you should write what you know in some aspect. So for at least one book, I'll get away with it, you know. without having to-
But they're also very well realized characters. Like the character of James, especially, he's a really well fleshed out person. So yeah, I think you drawing on the things you know, yourself, it actually really paid off.
Well, yeah,
And it isn't you exactly. Like it's clearly like it's got traits of you.
yeah, because you can, I guess, who do you know better than yourself, I suppose, and your family. And I don't know how well you guys know my sister, but like Holly, the other character in it, draws a lot from her. It's sort of like a like not really a girly girl, but still quite feminine. So yeah, I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna do it. And probably the dad draws from my dad as well, and Hanley to some degree. I don't know. There's a bunch of characters, but I'd say most of them have very real analogs, or at least composites of people in my life. And they're not exactly the same, but yeah. So that's my sort of take on it. I don't know if I'll continue to do that. I hope I just won't keep recycling the same characters, but I don't know. I think taking from existing people, whoever they are, that you know well, is probably not the worst thing in the world.
Definitely. There's so many like weird characters in the world. Like just the strangest, like I think we can all like think about the strangest person we know and what just like a wonderful, bizarre character they are.
Yeah.
And yeah, I tap into that. I like tap into people that I've met at parties, or it's almost better if you don't know these people really well, because then you can kind of like fill in the details of their life with like, what would make this person a real kook? Have you, okay, I think everyone who's Australian would know this. Have you guys seen Trent from Punch Bowl?
Yeah.
Trent from Punchy, right?
From Punchy.
Like if you're not Australian, look up Trent from Punch Bowl. It might not make any sense to you, but I wrote a whole character basically combining him with these two other interesting fictional characters I like. And it's one of my favorite characters ever. This is an absolute kook, that's all.
Are you advocating for picking bizarre people and inserting them into our book? Because
yeah,
that's what I'm. Okay.
Yes, I am.
Well, when it comes to using real people, I don't know that I do it consciously, but I do notice after the fact, I've kind of taken this quirk from someone. And one time I tried to like really think about it. Okay, I got this person in my life. I'm going to put them in the book. And what happened is that when I got to actually writing scenes with the character, it just started deviating from the person to the point I'm like, okay, that's not him anymore. And there's no point trying to stick to it, because it just doesn't necessarily work with what I needed from the character, going back to some characters being necessary to the plot. So yeah, I think I take some quirks. Like Alex said, I take a lot from myself. I think a lot of my characters, it's gonna sound awful, but they just want to be loved. They just want. I feel like a lot of them, if you just give them affection, they'll give it back to you, and that's something I dealt with as a kid. I just wanted to be part of something. And I feel like a lot of my characters, even the ones that are more jaded and maybe they got alcohol problems or drug problems, going back to Donnie, at the end of the day, their end game is that they just want to be accepted. And that kind of will unlock their quote unquote happy end game. So that kind of stuff. But most of the time, I'm not doing it on purpose.
Yeah, I'm the same. What about you, Phoenix?
Yeah, I also don't do it on purpose. But that being said, I feel like sometimes I deliberately try to avoid it because I feel like I kind of put it down in my head as like, no, it's not interesting if I just based off of a person that already exists. But at the same time, I think it can be a very powerful tool, especially like as at the very least, like almost like an improv prompt to get you going. Like Matan said, like, I'm just going to start with like I'm going to seed it off of this person, and then just whatever they become in the scene, like that will be the character. But like, I'm going to take some basic traits to kind of like start the culture and then see what they grow into. I do it a lot with narration voices though. If I'm reading a certain book or watching a certain thing, and then if I write immediately, my narration style might change a little bit and become more like that.
That's definitely true.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever done it purposefully, and I feel like I've never really wanted to try. I have such a clear image of all my characters in my head. It would be very weird if I was picturing, say, someone I know or a celebrity. I've always tried to work very hard to keep that quite separate in how because I want to do things to these people. I want to interrogate them in weird ways, and it would be weird if I felt they were bleeding in from anyone I actually know. But it might be worth a creative experiment one day if I ever wanted to. We're kind of at the point of the podcast now where I wanted to do some quick, small readings. So I have a couple of examples, and I know Alex also has some examples. So speaking of characters bleeding over to other characters, what I wanted to read as some examples is where I had this oh no moment, where I've started calling it where I can view the stitching at the seams between some characters, where despite best efforts, later I realized these are quite similar. They're wearing very similar clothes. After a step back, I was able to be like, no, I can articulate to myself how these characters are actually quite fundamentally different. So I'm at peace knowing they are different characters. But I thought at the same time it would be a fun, quirky exercise where I could read these two passages to you from two very different things, and you may see exactly what I'm talking about in that these characters are very similar. They're in very similar trope. They speak the same. They have similar characteristics. So the first little passage is from my Cypress stuff. So this is William as an example. And I guess a little bit of extra context is technically William came second. The other character I'm going to read out is Mikkel. Mikkel came first. William came second. And it was only when I went back and started editing some Mikkel stuff, I'm like, oh, hello, William. I guess you've been here all along. My bad. All right. So Ferguson yanked up Will's shirt, revealing the bandages from his surgery. Still not satisfied, the monster tugged the wrappings down. Will's freshly stitched wound stung against the exposed air. Had to see for myself, the thug grunted, relinquishing his grip on Will's wrists. Pobjoy watched from a safe distance, having scuttled back from the danger. Was it everything you wanted? Will breathed. He made a show of massaging feeling back into his wrists and had to hope no rot beneath Ferguson's nails would fester his stitches. Would a sack of scum like yourself be separated from his betters on Carew's orders, no less? Ferguson asked, with some excuse of surgery on a healthy man who crewed during the storm. Not unless he's gotten into the lieutenant's ear, told him all about our plans. Is this special treatment, I wondered, a reward for valuable information? Will blinked. It was more words than he had heard the Irishman string together, and he wasn't certain he understood them through his thick accent. For my sake, can you repeat again in English? You're a son of a Protestant whore, William. That she was, but if it's prostitution and loyalties you speak of, I'll make one thing clear. I'd rather become your willing whore than once more throw my lot in with His Majesty's Navy. See, you wound me. I told you I was unwell. Will motioned to his bandages. You said it was a fever, Ferguson grunted. Aye, of the gut. Pobjoy approached, seeming to decide that the physical threats had concluded. Are you recovering, Master Swallow? Unless the surgeon cuts me again, I believe I'll be well. Some lads expressed alarm upon hearing their fearless leader had taken ill, Pobjoy said. Will winced at fearless leader. Nothing worried him more than the whisperings of Swallow's mutiny reaching the wrong ears. It had rendered the surgery he'd endured for an alibi, which may yet still fester and kill him, moot. Who needs me when we have Leslie here? Will said, gesturing to the tree trunk to his right. Pobjoy gave him a look which seemed to communicate that he, too, understood that Ferguson would be incapable of organising the lice in his own crotch. We've been at sea for 3 weeks, Ferguson said. On a single hand, I've counted the 6 occasions we could have taken this brig already. On a single hand, Will repeated. Leslie, I continue to be impressed by the breeding pedigree of your family. So that's the Cyprus section. And then I'll jump to a Majesty section, which is not from Mikkel's POV. It's from Azer's POV interacting with Mikkel.
I just want to say I want a Ferguson spin-off at some point.
Another character that does run away with some scenes.
I just want to say I thought Ferguson was Scottish.
Oh, in the draft you read, he was. He's now Irish.
Why did you change him from Irish to Scottish?
Because
what does that serve?
I unearthed
Historical evidence.
I found some historical documents and I had to change it.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, to compare this to, White coats bumped one another in their attempt to get out of her way. Mikkel's two clever eyes scanned the tavern. He seemed fascinated but not surprised to see her striding towards him. Mistress Azer, he mused, but did not bow. To allow Shade and Jackson to slip away, his attention must remain on her. She needed to cause a scene. I never liked you, she announced and leveled a finger at him. Wearing a military uniform does not make you a warrior. You can barely call yourself a Kurokai. Stifled titters and oohs came from nearby tables. How often did the foot soldiers get to see assembly lords make spectacles of themselves? Mikkel's eyes brightened to find himself at the center of one. I'm not convinced you've ever held a sword in your life, she continued. Her heart raced, hoping Shade was making good use of the distraction. Mikkel evaluated her comments for several moments, rubbing at his chin. I'm so used to hearing the opposite of that insult. Normally I'm accused of wielding too many swords. He trailed off with a shrug. Perhaps insult should be left in the care of those who handle them more deftly. Clumsy minds do make a mess of them. Chuckles sounded from their steadily growing audience. Mikkel seemed to notice the attention and was drawn like a moth to flame. Nor am I convinced your interest lies solely in swords either, my dear, he added with a wink. Rumor has it you've been showing off your jewelry collection. He gestured to her chest. The necklace, secured beneath her coat, hung heavy with Mikkel's implication. He smiled, appearing pleased she'd followed his meaning. I'd recommend circumspection. He leaned in to whisper conspiratorially. Flaunting it unveils the lie our master inquisitor worked rather hard to put in place. And that's the end of that brief section. So that was me having an alarming moment of they might have different morals in that Mikkel, I think, is a bit more of a martyr while Will's a bit more self-serving, but put them on the page like that, they act very similar.
I'll just say this though, having read a few drafts of Majesty, that scene feels like one of the newer ones. Am I correct?
It is, yeah.
Isn't it post-Will then?
That scene is in particular, and one where I thought showed off his traits, but I feel like Mikkel has always had those traits. Mikkel's always been Mikkel. Yeah.
Well, I do remember him earlier, but this is one of his better scenes. Like he's just, it's more on full display. But yeah, I see what you mean. The characters do sound similar, but in a good way.
Yeah, it was just an alarming. I feel like it's something no one else in the world would have noticed if I hadn't pointed it out. But just in my own writing practice, I had a moment of, I think I'm drawing on the same tools here. By accident. But now that I'm aware of it, I can be a bit more strategic, I guess, about when I want to highlight their differences so they're not the same palette. Alex, I'll throw it over to you. What's your writing examples?
Yeah, sure. So I've got one from the short story collection that I'm going to put out pretty soon. Shameless plug. It's actually towards the end of one of the short stories, but I won't give it any context, so I think it'll be all right. And then the other one is, and that's a character, and I kind of write it from like a bit of an archetype. And the other one is like a narrative. It's like a first person. Actually, in this case, it's just first person. But it sort of bleeds into a story that's actually telling someone else's story. So I don't know, I thought it'd be interesting to take one from the third person, then one from like a closer in. So this is the first one. It's from a story called The Last Great American Stallion. I think that's what it's called.
I know that one.
Yes. So please forgive my terrible Texan accent. The driver got out in a leisurely way, swinging his big cowboy boots onto the dirt. He wore blue jeans, a checked flannel pattern, and an old brownish Stetson. His face was very pale and weather-beaten, but friendly. He got out and held out his hand. Lou was hesitant to take it, but the man laughed. Don't fuss yourself. I ain't gonna bite. His drawl was Texan. He leaned back in the car and drew out a cigarette. Camels. Lou took one apprehensively and lit it. The sunset, off to the west, had not been affected by the malaise that followed the man's car, and they watched it. She's a pearler, the man said quietly. Don't get a sunset like this anywhere in the world. No, sir, you most certainly don't. The man turned to Lou, half of his face shadowed. I suspect you know why I'm here, he said softly. Lou kicked absently at a patch of dirt. Yeah, I just about figured it out. And a drawn, fearful expression came over his face. Was I the only one who saw it? the end times, I mean? Why me? Why now? The Texan bent double and howled with laughter, but there was no malice in it. When he rose again, there were tears streaming from his eyes and his cheeks had taken on some color. That scene's funny because I don't usually do a lot of visual description, but I feel like a lot of this, because it's an archetype, it's like a cowboy, you know, he's like an old, like, yeah, sort of cowboy. Like, I figured like a lot of that idiom and color just came through in just the way that you can't see the dialogue, but the dialogue's written with all sorts of like contractions and stuff. It's very obvious, the accent. And then the second one also has a really strong voice, but it's like I'll sort of, you'll sort of get it. This is from a different short story that I put on Reddit a while ago. July 2nd, 1928. Strange day today, damn strange and unsettling. I know I oughtn't to curse, but if it isn't my diary and events don't warrant it, I'll be the son of a monkey's uncle. I was making the usual rounds to the old back roads of Indiana looking for rubes, and wasn't making any headway. Nobody was buying. Had 3 doors slammed in my face at least. I'd have thought your garden variety Midwestern hick would be clamoring for an encyclopedia set. Shows what I know. In any case, I found myself driving through this little town. Little isn't quite the right word. It was big enough, plenty of fancy houses and big old general store, but the whole place had a queer kind of lifelessness to it, which made it seem small and mean. There was a brownness about the place. I'm not sure how else to put it. Just didn't feel quite right. Lawns were all dead, and there was an odd funk in the air, as if rotted garbage or something. Yeah, and that's that. And yeah,
I really like that.
there's
I want to read that story.
I like
The
that a lot. too.
son of a monkey's uncle.
Yeah, that's I kind of try to keep to that idiom the whole way through, because this guy is actually telling someone else's story just after this bit. You get into it, but yeah, it's.
I'm just running the thread. So the son of a monkey's uncle is the
It's
monkey's
like a
cousin.
monkey's cousin.
Yeah, this monkey's
Cousin of
uncle.
a monkey.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure I was.
We just
on
need
top
to
of
make
it.
sure that we have the familial history really checked out there. So
Yeah.
thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, but those are 2 very different characters that I think were kind of drawn from archetypes. For reference, neither of those I think were drawn from real life characters. They were more sort of just like, one came about, the cowboy came about just based on the context of the story, and the other one was just like, how can I just write in a really weird, fun voice? Yeah, so that's mine.
Excellent. Did anyone have any closing thoughts or anecdotes they wanted to share on their own characters bleeding together that they've potentially noticed?
I would just say, in the end, I think I should do it more often, but just let the characters behave in the way I established them, and screw the plot. It will work out, hopefully.
It was just kind of, as we were throughout the discussion, I was just kind of thinking, like, in the end, I wonder how many characters we can actually write. Like how, or is it just like however many shades or colors we can break our own personality up into? And like, because I know in One Piece, I write a very narcissistic character, and it's basically me just having fun. Like, what if I indulged all the shadow side of all of my actual ideals?
That's
and
the
just, like,
vampire
wrote to
story,
that?
right?
Yeah, it's the vampire story.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, and it's a fun exercise. It's like, what if it's kind of like, it lets you kind of, so writing, people should try it. It lets you kind of air out you can explore different aspects of your personality. You can break your own psyche down and write to certain aspects of them. In the end, it was cool hearing everyone talk and see what characters we gravitate towards, because it did feel like everyone was writing flavors of themselves to some degree. Obviously that, sometimes very abstractly, and it's not there's room to breathe in this statement, but it's something.
Yeah, no, I think I fundamentally agree with that, even though I think most writers would be dragged kicking and screaming before admitting that's what they do. I do.
It's not like all my books are like diary entries at all. It's just like, yeah.
I do have a closing quote to end the podcast from Tayari Jones. When you write a novel, you make other people see your imaginary friends.
That's true. I think
Amen.
just to finish up, I think writing good characters is to some degree an exercise in trust, because you have to allow them to kind of do their own thing. And especially if you're a plotter, they just do some weird things sometimes. Like, and everyone plots to some degree. So I think writing a really good character can be, an exercise in trusting that they know what they're doing, that you know what you're doing, and that also it's what's best for things.
What a final thought. God damn.
Thanks, Paddy.
Can you imagine Tolkien's face when Frodo doesn't throw the ring?
He's like,
What the?
So many words invested and
Frodo,
it doesn't do
put it in. He's like, all right, I need to write someone
Are you
else
for
in here.
real?
That's where Sam came from.
well, he didn't. Yeah, exactly. He didn't throw it in the end, did he? Like,
Tolkien was like,
what
what am I
that
supposed to
happened? He was just like, what are you doing? Come on, this is the
Shoot.
point.
I need to go
I'm
all the way
gonna
back to
die.
the beginning and put a different character in that was there the whole time.
And then there was Sam.
And then there was Sam.
Luckily, this guy named Sam was.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So was Gollum. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right. This has been Pros and Cons by Precipice Fiction, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, this is Alex from the podcast. I'm putting this in because this is a bit of an older episode and we didn't get a chance to ask for a review. Reviews are really, really helpful in terms of getting the podcast to other people, other potential writers that might be, sort of struggling with the same things you are struggling with, or maybe just like to listen to us talk for whatever reason. Anyway, if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever your respective podcast listening service is, that would be super, super helpful. Thanks very much.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.